So we are back and we're talking about our application. We're still talking about our application here. We're still talking about top stories. Top stories works for the most part. We were able to pass in JSON. We were able to pass in JSON using the bundle class to read that JSON data into a Swift object. We were able to create a search bar to search by title or to search by abstract headline. We were able to segue from one cell to an X. So we've done a lot with our app. But there's one part missing. We're missing that actual image that the app has or the headline has. We're missing that image. So we need to go ahead and get that image. But before we're able to get that image, we need to talk about different classes that will enable us to get to that image. One of the key classes, or the key class to networking we'll introduce today, is called URLSession. URLSession is a class in Foundation. You import Foundation, you get URLSession, right? What does URLSession do? URLSession is an object that coordinates a group of related networking events. Basically what that means is URLSession is the gateway to the internet, okay? URLSession is that class that we need to use in order to package a request. Very similar to yesterday, where we saw our phone being a client and the internet being the server. So when we make that request using URLSession. So this is the key class we need, right? And the overview, Apple says the URLSession class and related classes, right? There's related classes along there. There's URL request. There's a bunch of other classes we'll see later in curriculum. The URLSession class and related classes provide an API. We spoke about API yesterday. You see that? API is not only for web APIs. Everybody with me? The API tells me I have a set of classes, methods that's publicly available to the developer. That's what API stands for here. So, URLSession class related classes provide an API for downloading data. In our case, we want to download an image. Downloading data from and uploading data to endpoints. Yesterday we also saw endpoints indicated by URLs, right? So here, all our headline has a URL. They have a URL with the image. So we need to pass in that URL to our URLSession, create a task, make a request, and we get back data. That data we get back, we pass that data into our image. Right? So first, make a request to that particular image URL, get back data, that data we get, we use that data we get to pass it into an image. Okay? So this is URLSession, and the big method we'll be looking at on URLSession is data task. This particular function here, adding data task to a session. So you have a session. On our session, we'll use a singleton. We'll talk more about singletons later. But on our URLSession, we'll use a singleton called shared. On that, we'll create a data task. This particular data task here creates a task that retrieves the contents of the specified URL. So we pass it a URL, in that case, our image URL, and it gets us back this completion handler. The completion handler will have data, which is optional. It could be nil. It will have a response. The response has the HTTP codes in there, right? Is everything okay? So forth. Also has like a meme type. We'll talk about what meme types look like. Also has an error. So again, we'll use URLSession, and the method we'll use on URLSession is data task, okay? Data task is that method that actually gets us back the data that we need. Any questions so far? So those are one of the classes we'll be seeing today. We're talking about getting data from the internet. We need to use URLSession to get that data. I'm introducing the classes we need to get there. So when we see them, we have an overall idea of what they are. Okay, next up we have result type. Result type is newly introduced to Swift 5.0. Result type is an enumeration here, as we see. It has two values. It has a success case and a failure case. One of those two things happened. We made a request, either it's successful or it's failed. Everybody with me? One of two scenarios. Either I was able to get back the data I'm looking for, or something went wrong, right? Maybe the network is down, maybe I'm not authorized to get to that URL, whatever it is. Next up, we mentioned meme types. What is meme types? Meme types, the meme type we're interested in today is an image meme type. Basically, a meme type tells you, basically a meme type is a multimedia type. Like, what type am I expecting? Am I expecting an MP3 file back? Am I downloading an MP3 file? Am I uploading an MP3 file? What type of file are you using? Right? It's a media type, also known as multipurpose internet mail extension, or meme type, right? Thank God for the meme type there. That's a mouthful, right? It's a standard. It indicates the nature and the format of a document. The document we're interested in is an image. So the meme type we'll be using in our function will be meme type JPEG. One second. So the meme type we're interested in here is meme type / JPEG. Right? This is the meme type we'll be passing in. Right? Next up, let's briefly talk about escaping closures, because we'll also see escaping closure in our function definition. An escaping closure, basically, what the definition is, it says a closure is said to escape a function when the closure is passed as an argument to the function. Basically, what that means is we're making a network request. Everybody, if you're making a network request, by definition, it's known as asynchronous. It's asynchronous because that return from the network, you do not get it back instantaneously. You have to wait for a period of time. I'm waiting for a period of time, it's done asynchronously. URLSession by design, is asynchronous. I do not get back the results right away. Like, we create a function, we say function add 2 numbers. I get back my result right away, correct? So I have a return, I say return int, I get back my result. On an asynchronous call, put in a return value, you will get back the return value, but it will be empty because the function actually returns before the closure is completed. Everybody with me? So if I put a return on my function as we do today, which we're not gonna have a return, if I do a return expecting my data to come back, it's gonna return me 0, right? Because that function quickly returns right away. Meanwhile, my closure is still working because the network hasn't given me back the data yet. So because of all that, we need to mark our closure as escaping. Explicitly, there's an @escaping symbol that we see here. So our closure will be very similar to line number 2. We have our function, it takes a closure, a completion handler, we'll mark it @escaping, and we'll pass in a result type. We'll see what all that looks like together. And lastly, let's talk about concurrency. Let's briefly talk about concurrency here and what dispatch queue is. So as I spoke about yesterday briefly, concurrency is multiple things happening on our device at the same time, right? We have multiple cores, right? My laptop right now has 6 cores, right? We have multiple cores on our devices now, right? So there's multiple things we could do at the same time, right? So concurrency at a high level is doing multiple activities, doing multiple jobs, right? On my operating system at the same time, or in my program at the same time, in my app, doing multiple things at the same time. The user is able to scroll their Instagram photos while the photos are being uploaded or downloaded. Everybody with me? That's multiple things happening. The user is not scrolling, waiting for an image to load and cannot scroll. The user should always be able to scroll that feed while the images are being processed. This is concurrency. Right? Multiple things happening at the same time. I'm able to scroll my table view while the photo is uploaded. It would be a bad experience if the user is scrolling the table view. It stops scrolling because an image is uploaded. Everybody with me? That would be a bad experience. I want to see the text of the image. Yes, the image is not there yet, but at least show me the text. This is concurrency. And in Swift, in iOS, the way we deal with concurrency, having multiple things happening at the same time, is using the dispatch queue API. So we'll be using dispatch queue to get back to the main queue, meaning the UI. Anytime you do any UI updates needs to be happening on the main thread. As we said yesterday with the initiation of talking about concurrency, the main thread, picture the main thread as the expressway, right? We have our trains, the expressway should always be free for those trains to just like go through, right? Meanwhile, you have freight trains on different tracks doing heavy lifting of trains, of cargo, whatever it is. They're on different tracks. But the express line, very similar to the HOV lane, HOV lane should always be empty. Not empty, but always be going, right? You should not be in the HOV lane if you're idling around, right? Everybody with me? If you're in the slow lane, that's fine. You could take your own time to get to where you want to go to. But HOV lane, main thread, should be up for the UI. The UI should always be active and fluid. The user should never be waiting for an image before they're able to scroll the table view. Everybody with me? Right? So dispatch queue takes care of that. With dispatch queue, I could put workloads on different tracks. Or what's the terminology for those different tracks would be different threads. I could have different threads. The main thread I always have access to, it's the UI. Anything with UI, updating the table view, that's a UI thread. Downloading an image is on the background, should not be on the main thread, should not be on the main track, because that takes time. Anything that takes time, getting stuff from the database, processing images, uploading an image, uploading a file, none of those should ever be on the main track. None of those should ever be on that main thread, okay? Xcode is very good. Xcode started in Xcode 9 telling us when we should be on the main thread. You get like a purple error, a purple line error telling you, hey, stop. This should be updated on the main thread, okay? So it tells us, which we'll see today, it tells us, hey, stop. You need to dispatch to the main thread. And dispatch queue allows us to make concurrency in our applications. Good. Okay, so that's an introduction. Again, we'll go deeper into each of those topics, and we'll become more familiar with those topics as we do more URL session requests and networking calls, okay? But that's at a high level where we're going, okay? Great. So let's start off here by we'll create a new file. We'll create a new file. It's a Swift file. We'll create a new file. It's a Swift file. And we'll call it image client. Swift file, yeah. A Swift file, not CocoaTouch, just a simple Swift file. We call it image client. Capital I, capital C. And this particular file will say it's a struct. And it's called image client. The one purpose of image client right now is to get us an image, and we'll pass in a URL, and it gets us back an image, right? So we'll create one function for it. The function will be a type method function. Here, we will call it fetch image for URL string, which is a string. Again, the task of this particular function takes in a URL string and returns an image. Great. So let's start. So the user sends us a URL string. Let's validate, first of all, that it is a valid string, a valid URL. So validate it is a valid URL. To validate that, we'll use our guard statement. we have the URL string. So here we're using a URL initializer. We're using a URL initializer to create a URL. Yes, question?
So we don't have to put that into returning an image because there's no.
We're not returning, our completion handler will be the one capturing the image.
Okay.
So it takes in a URL and uses a completion handler to capture processed image from the network or from the URL source, right? Example, HTTPS : whatever JPEG, right? A bit similar to this. This is what our URL string will look like, something like that. All right, great. So we have our URL initializer. The one argument this one will take is a string, and we pass in our URL string. And here we say else, it is an optional. For now, we will fatal error. We'll come back to fixing that up. If we do have time, we'll refactor this code. So for now, we'll say bad URL. It's a link, so it notices the link. So bad URL, and I put in URL string here. Tiffany, it's a URL. Well, it's not a valid URL, but. So here we have our URL. Great. So that's step one. Step one, validate that the URL is a valid URL. Step two, we'll start doing work with our URLSession method. So here, create a data task using the URLSession class. And please get in the habit of doing exactly what I'm doing for now, because if you forget to say task.resume or resume, it won't actually work. It always will be in a suspended state. I'll talk about when I get there, I'll talk about it in more depth. But first, let's create a constant. We'll call it data task. We'll create a constant, we'll call it data task. And here is where we first see in URLSession. We'll use URLSession to create a data task. What's a data task? It's basically a job that needs to be done. That job that needs to be done is go to the network and fetch me the data for that URL. That's the job that's being done. That's the task that will be done. Okay? So here we'll say URLSession dot shared. Yeah, something's definitely wrong with that projector. It affects the LCD screen here. Okay, so data task, URLSession.shared, and we said we're interested in one method for an URLSession. That one method was data task, right? Data task with URL. So I type in data task here. Select the one that says data task with URL. Can everybody see the screen? Right? So we select the one that says data task with URL. Yes, but not the one that says URL request. We'll see that later in curriculum. But simple URL, not URL request, just URL. Right?
She means, do you want the one that just says with URL?
Oh, the one that has the completion handler. Sorry. We need the completion handler here in order to get the data. Okay? There's two ways to get the data on a URLSession. One way is a completion handler. The next way is by delegate methods. Okay? But we'll use the completion method, completion handler. We'll press enter and press enter again. Okay? Press enter again. For data, we simply type in data. Go ahead and click on tab. For response, simply type in response. And for error, simply type in error. Build, make sure you have no errors. I do have an error.
You press enter and then enter again without that.
I press data task, right? I said completion handler. I press enter.
Okay.
Right? I press enter again. Sorry. This is URL here. I press enter here. I said data. I said response. And I said error.
It was just missing the URL part, the URL.
Yeah, it was like URL response. So the URL is the URL we created from our God statement. So this is what our function should look like. URL session that's shared, data task. Data task takes in one parameter. The one parameter is the URL. And it takes in a trailing closure. Our trailing closure has 3 arguments: data, response, and error. Right? Data is the actual data that we need to convert to that image. Response has the meme type. Response also has the status code. Right? Error has a description of any error that may have occurred. For example, it could be our network connection has been lost. Okay, that's where that's captured. So each of those data points have an associated value to them. Data, again, is the raw data that we downloading from the internet or from that particular URL that gives us the data that we need to change that data into our image. We're able to convert our data to an image using a UI image initializer that takes in a data object. Any questions so far? So far, so good, right? Okay. Again, don't forget this step here. This is why I want us to get in the habit of creating a variable for our data task, because you could also do this. Let me show us. We could also do this. I could omit this variable or this constant, and I could simply say .resume. I could simply do that. But most times we'll forget to do .resume. If you do not do .resume, your network request will never come back, or it will never get executed. It's what's known in as a suspended state. By default, if I do not say resume that request, it never gets executed. At some point, hopefully that API gets fixed. I mean, I've seen it since I've been in, well, it's been forever like that. You have to say resume the task. So that's why instead of doing it this way, I want us to get into the habit of creating a constant, call it data task, and call data task.resume. Right? Again, resumes the task if it is suspended. It is suspended by default. Okay? By default, it's suspended. You'll never get back your completion handler. You'll be like, oh, what's happening? I am using URLSession, but I'm not getting no data. Oh, I forgot my resume. But explicitly writing a constant here, you'll get a warning from the compiler saying you're not using it, meaning you're not executing the data task. That way it forces you to say data task.resume. Okay?
Sorry, what's this? There's like this rogue in at the end.
Rogue.
Rogue in at the very
At the end of
bottom.
the,
Are we gonna
it's
do more
like
of that?
normally it's like something in something else or like for something.
Oh, this guy here?
It just cuts off, yeah.
Oh, because we need to have more code now. Like we have our 3, it's a completion, it's a callback, right? It's a closure, like we always saw closures before. Like if you do sorted closure, it will give you 2 variables in there you have to complete the code, right? So we're not done yet.
Okay,
Yeah, we're not done yet. We're not done yet. We're not done yet. Okay, let's continue on. Everybody, are you still up? Hello. Okay, so here, let's see if we have an error. Everything we have is optional, by the way. Everything we have, those 3 arguments are all optionals. Anything we need to do with them, we need to unwrap them. Everybody with me? Data is optional, response is optional, and error is optional. So to use the values, we have to unwrap them. Do we agree? Okay, so let's see if there's an error first. So check if an error exists. Okay, so here we say if let error equal to error. Here we have an error. I'll put a to do here. because we'll really come back to that. To do add enum error. Over here to do add enum error. For now, I'll ignore the error here. Actually, let's keep the error. If something does actually go wrong. And then simply print it, but we know we have to refactor it with an enum. So here I will say error, and I'll print out the error. Great. Okay. I'll also put a to-do here, because I'll come back to this. I don't want to overwhelm us with all that stuff today. I will say check to-do, check for valid status code. Of 200 to 299. I know you have that power, but I want everybody to have that power too at the same time. So we'll come back to it. That's fine. Okay? No, I want to capture it with an enum, with cases, with associated values. Right? All right. Okay, cool. So next to do, check for valid min type. Check for valid meme type of image JPEG. Cool. So it is an error. We capture the error, and we have, great. Cool. I really want to come back to the heavy lifting later. I want us to just at least be comfortable with this first part first. So very simply, we have a function, it's called fetch image. It takes a URL string, checks to see if the URL is valid. Go ahead, makes a URL session data task request. At this point, it does hit the network. This particular task here, as a matter of fact, when we say URL session shed data, when we say resume here, invokes network request. Right? It actually does, that line of code here actually does the physical request. Like when we were in Postman yesterday and we said send, that actually sends that request. Okay? Or executes, probably a better word here, executes network request. Okay, cool. So let us get into some other heavy lifting. If we do not say resume, this does not get executed. It's always in a suspended state. By default, that's what it is. Okay? Any other questions before we move on? We need to update our function definition. We need to update our function definition. Last step, we'll say if let data equal to data. So here I'm unwrapping the data. So at this point, if I do have an error, I capture the error. If not, I do have data. This is where I need to create my image data. So create use data to create an image. We will come back to this and we'll add in enum case to return an error to the view controller. Like you don't want to crash the app if there's an error. I mean, as a matter of fact, I think we have a fatal error here. Just remove this. We don't want to crash the app for now. Just make a print statement.
So when it comes to like checking for errors and you don't want it to crash, you just want
No. If the user has no network, you don't want to crash the app.
Makes sense.
It's not the fault, poor user. Right? But that's not a developer error. It's not a developer error. You don't want to crash the app. So we'll come back to those to-dos if we have time. And again, look at the time, right? It's already 20 minutes to 4. So, cool. So let's continue on. If we have the data, this is where we have the completion handler. We'll talk about completion handlers now. So in our function definition here, we'll add in a completion handler. Because remember, I cannot simply return an image. Let me put that in. We cannot simply return an image from this function. Right? The next question is why? Why can we not do that? Because URLSession performs an asynchronous network call which means the call or the return, which means the call relies on the network and is done on the background. Not performed instantaneously. Or, yeah. Basically, it's a background task. So I'm making a network request. URLSession by default is an asynchronous call. By default, what does that mean? The call itself, the function gets returned right away, but my actual completion handler, it won't get back that data until some extended delay. Who knows, it could be 0 seconds, 3 seconds, it doesn't matter. But the whole point is the function returns right away. Meanwhile, the completion handler is delayed with the getting the data back from the network. Okay? We've all seen what network stuff looks like. I put in my username in some browser, I press enter, it takes a while. Right? It's not instantaneously. It's not saying call an add function. Calling an add function, you get back the result right away. Making a network request is done asynchronously, it's done on the background. So we have to use an escape enclosure, which we just saw earlier in the introduction of lectures. So let's see what that looks like. So here we have to create a completion handler. So right after my string type, I'll put in a comma. Right after my string type, I'll put in a comma. My argument name for my completion handler will simply be called completion. Colon. I need to mark it at escaping, as I mentioned before. At escaping because the function returns before the closure gets its result. So we need to mark that closure, that completion, as escaping. It's an escaping closure, as we saw earlier here. Right? As we saw earlier here, an escaping closure, the function returns before that closure gets its value. So you have to mark explicitly the escaping closure or the closure as escaping. Earlier in Unit 1, we've never seen escaping closures. Because all our closures, we have map, we have filter, the results, we get the results back right away. There's no network call being done. Okay, so here we have our at escaping closure. Let me go back a little step here. Let me open that space up so we have all the space we need to see everything that's going on. I'll even put a break here. Okay, so we have at escaping, and I'll start my closure syntax. We all love closure syntax, right? I'll build my application to make sure everything is valid, and we'll continue working on our closure, because that's not the end. So my completion to review, the purpose of the completion is to capture the image that we got back. We're not returning anything explicitly. We're not saying function returns a UI image. If you attempt to do that, you'll never get an image back because the function returns right away. The minute I execute the function, I call it, it returns me an image. Network call is still being done. Network call comes back. Function is returned already. I lost my image. Everybody with me? So we need to use a closure to capture the image. Closures, they capture values. So this is not going to work. We'll attempt it at some point. We're beginners. That's what we do. We try stuff, which is fine.
Sorry, Alex, can you explain that one more time because it sounds important?
Okay. So normally we have a function, it does something, we want it to return a value. In our example, we want it to return an image, right? That's what we're interested in. So I pass in a URL string, I want to get back an image. So one of the ways a beginner or anybody who's like new to some sort of environment like that would say, oh, I could just return a UI image here, right? And when my data does come up, I could just say return image. But what happens when your function gets called in your view controller, the function returns right away. The minute I call my function, it returns me a value. It returns me the image. At that point, the image is still empty or nil or whatever. But the purpose of the closure, it needs to capture the image when it comes back from the network.
So because this like escaping variable hasn't actually finished doing what it's doing, the output would return before that even happens.
Exactly.
And it wouldn't have the value.
Exactly. Exactly. No matter how fast your network is, it will never get the value. Okay? Very good. We'll come back to it many times here because, again, this is all new syntax for us. I mean, again, we're just like 8 weeks into programming. It's a lot, right? Okay, so here we have our closure. It's marked add escaping because the function returns before the closure gets its values. This is a closure here. Explain to me what that closure does. Takes in nothing, does nothing. That's not what we want, right? We need to expand on that. But yes, that's what the closure does. That particular closure takes in nothing, no arguments, doesn't return anything. So far, so good. Okay. We spoke about result type, right? We spoke about result type. It's funny over there. We spoke about result type. We'll add result type in our list of arguments for the closure. Let's go and update. Please follow along. We need to do this at least 5 times before. We saw table views. Table views was a bit straightforward there. It still took us about 10, 12 iterations to get it. This is doubling that complexity. So paying attention every time we do it is very important, right? Cool. So here we have add escaping here, and we need to say it's a result type. Our result type takes angle brackets. I really want to talk about generics very soon. Maybe we talk about generics when we come back. But I want to start talking about generics and what that looks like. But here, with an array is a generic. Okay, so here we have a result type. Again, if we go back to the documentation for result type is a value that represents either success or failure. This is all it does. It's an enum, success or failure. So this is what we're representing here. We have our result type. The success we have is a UI image. Actually, before I do that, let's update foundation. Just change foundation to UI kit. You're waiting for that one?
Yeah.
I see you. I see you. Okay, so we have our result type here. And for success, success is the first parameter. The success value, it could be an array, it could be anything. But in our case, it's a UI image. We'll mark it optional. And we'll pass in some error. So again, result type is new in Swift 5.0. It's pretty neat to work with. If you've seen anything before that, it was a bit more verbose work in the view controller, but now it's easier. You have result type in your view controller. You could use a simple switch, say if success, this, if failure, this. Okay? Okay, great. So we have our completion handler here.
How is the completion already
Remember your map function in calculator? Right? You had your map function take a closure.
Yeah.
Everybody remember the calculator app? We had a map taking in a closure. This is very similar. The only difference is the at escaping.
No, but how is the result?
We haven't done the code for that yet. We need to do the code for that. Once we capture that result, we'll have it in our view controller.
Oh, okay.
We haven't captured that yet.
Okay.
We haven't captured that. We just defined what the closure is, what the completion is. So we could capture it in different places. We could capture it when we have an error, and so forth. Cool? For now, where I want to capture it, did we all update our function, guys? Are you getting an error of the completion?
Yes, is all of them.
Christian, what's your error?
Something about the UI image on the
Make sure you update to UI kit. We did that. Update to UI kit. Christian? Okay. All right. So let's go to our data here. Use data to create an image. So for our completion here, go ahead and type in completion. Where we have data, type in completion here. Well, before that, we need to actually create the image. So let me create the image.
So we're gonna use the retrieve data to create the image.
Let's do it together. So let's create the image first. So here we have image. We'll use the data to create the image, yes. We'll use UI image. UI image has an initializer on it that takes in data. So UI image data takes in a data object and returns an image. Are we paying attention? Are we having fun? So here we have UI image initializer. It takes in a data object. It returns us an image. So now we have an image. Great. But as we said before, I can't simply just return image here. That would be great, right? If I just said return image. That would be awesome. But if we do that, our image will always be empty. Okay? Our image will always be empty. So instead, we want to use our completion handler to capture result of image. So type in completion. Again, it's an enum, associated value. So type in completion dot success. At this point, it's a success. At this point in my code, I have an image. That means I'm able to get an image. So I pass in my image object. This is the one point where we got success, right? This is where we got success. When we were able to get to the data, when we were able to bypass the error, and when we were able to get to the image. Okay? To do, we'll come back here. We actually have enough information to continue. We'll come back and do the to-dos. We'll pick it up again on Monday here. But for now, let's get out of this particular struct and go test the code out. Let's go test out our code. Any questions before we move on?
What would happen if it failed in this situation?
If it failed, we'll get like a print error here. We could get a print error here. We could get...
What time to see?
We'll get print errors, but ideally you want to pass that error back to your view controller. That's why I have to do this. We'll come back on it.
Well, assuming, let's say, like by programmer fault, that all of these errors like didn't consider some other failure circumstance, what would happen when we got to the completion success? Would just nothing happen?
If we got there, we definitely have data,
Okay.
right? If we got there, we definitely have data,
There's no okay.
right? Here we could return if, right? That helps you visualize it better. Here we have a completion handler. Yeah. So if we get here, we definitely have data.
Okay.
Cool. Any other questions?
Yeah, what else do we have to put in to actually get the image though? Because, well, where would we put that in? Like, this is just a function that we're using. So is it that we have to use this function?
We have to use that function in the cell
To take in the URL
from the cell.
from the picture.
Exactly. But before that, I want to update our headlines model to get us a thumbnail image. Right? Let's go back to our everybody. Any other questions about the particular model? Not model, but image client. Any other questions? We'll come back to it. But for now, what we saw, the big things we saw today in this particular function, URL session, escaping closures, result type. Those are big. Those are big. Those are what we need to use to talk to the network. We'll come back and we'll review it. But for now, let's go to our news headline. Our news headline, where are we here? We don't have enough information to get an image so far. So let's see what we have. In our news headline, in our top stories technology, to get to an image URL, we need to get to the multimedia array. Everybody with me? Right, maybe? We need to get to the multimedia array in order to get to, first, we need to get to our thumbnail. First, we need to get to our thumb large image. Second, we need to get to our super jumbo image, this guy. So we have a bit more JSON parsing to do. Not much, but we have some more JSON parsing to do. Because right now we don't have the multimedia property in our news headline. Everybody with me? Cool. So make sure that we're in news headline. Let's make some more additions here to our news headline. We don't have a thumbnail at all, but we need to create one. We need to create one. We'll create one right now. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and create a struct. We'll create a struct. We'll call it multimedia. For multimedia, what are we after? We're after a URL. And again, this multimedia, I'm not just making things up. I'm taking it from our JSON here. So multimedia, if you look at any multimedia object, it has a URL. We don't care about the height and width for now, but we do care about the format type. So the format here, we'll get. The caption, we could probably take the caption. It looks useful, right? So caption, format, URL. This is what we're after. So URL, caption. Caption is a string.
Is it the name? The newsfeed controller.
Not controller, the model.
Wait, so format, caption.
URL, caption, and format. Format is also a string. And for format, what are we caring about? We care about the thumb large, and super jumbo. Those are the two we care about. Those are the two we care about. Let's create two computed properties. We'll create a computed property to return. What's that, time to go home? We'll create a computed property to return us the thumb image string. Computed property returns a string. Actually, it doesn't return a string, sorry. It returns a multimedia item. Doesn't return a string because that itself is a multimedia item too. So it returns a multimedia item, and here we simply say, 1 second, let's take that out. Sorry, apologies. Make an extension on our multimedia. Apologies. I don't know. Extension on Newsline Media, sorry. That's what I'm saying sorry for. So on Newsline Media, on any news headline, we could say thumbnail image, it returns us a multimedia item. Okay? So here we have our thumb image, it's a multimedia type. And now let's go ahead and return.
How does
Within the news headline? We can, but we want to separate it here. So here, let's just simply return, what are we returning? Return multimedia. Where's my multimedia? Oh, I don't have a multimedia yet. Multimedia here. Multimedia is of type multimedia. It's an array, right? Yes, it's an array of multimedia items. An array of multimedia items. Okay, let's keep going. So here, I'm sorry. So here we return multimedia. There we go. We want to filter it. Multimedia, we want to filter multimedia. What are we looking for here? If it's a thumbnail, we're looking for thumbnail large. Right? So if the format equal to the string thumb large, be careful here, make sure you spell thumb large correctly. Extension, news headline, thumbnail, return, multimedia filter. What do we need here? We need the first item. First item is a multimedia item. Very good. What is the next error here? News headline does not conform to quotable. We have, oh, this guy needs to conform to quotable. Nobody's helping me here. Guys, do we see the error? But you guys not saying anything, huh?
I thought you left it there.
It's that I left it there, just for purposes. Yeah? Okay. Okay. Remember, our type needs to conform to quotable if one other type is using it. So be careful here. All right, I know. I'm looking for one lifeline. You are looking at your code. I see you. Okay, the next computed property is Super Jumbo. Very close, very similar to this guy. Again, don't copy off of here. This one is Super Jumbo. Super Jumbo. This is fine. Okay, so we have two computed properties on our news headline. One is thumb image, returns us a multimedia type. On that multimedia type, we could simply say .url, and this is what we're going to be passing to the image client in the cell, in the headline cell.
How did you fix that error?
Quotable, the one you did not tell me about.
Quotable multimedia.
Right?
Sorry, can you to the top?
To the top. This guy?
No, all the way up.
All the way up. Madam.
All the way up. So we have all the way up.
Sorry, here. I can't go up anymore.
Okay.
We haven't added anything new up here except line 21. That's it.
Right, but it says news headline does not conform to protocol decodable.
Yes, make sure multimedia does conform to quotable.
I'm gonna be sure because I hate seeing errors.
Yeah, errors, you should not keep them for too long.
And
And thumb image, multimedia, filter. We're only looking for those two types. There's other types, we're not interested in them. We're interested in the thumb image because this one is going to be 150 by 150. And this one is approximately 1080 by 2080, whatever it is, something like that, ish, right? Cool? How are we doing with typing? It's good. The new things we added, we didn't have a multimedia struct. We need a multimedia struct because we need to capture it from the JSON. What we're interested in the multimedia, the URL caption we could use later. The format, yes, we need that because we use that format to filter, right? We use that format to filter what I'm looking for. I want to only get back the one that says thumb large. All right, let's go ahead to our cell. Are we ready to move to the cell? Are we ready to move to the cell? Yes, maybe.
Why is it dot where first?
Why is it dot first? Oh, I should only have one result, really, right? Because we only have one thumb image, right? So I say dot first because I need to get back to some value. I'm only expecting one value anyway, but because it's an array, it's filter, Tiffany, because it's a filtered array, it returns us a result of array, right? It's only one result, so we only take dot first.
So,
Even if there's no possibility there's more than one.
does it matter that it's variable thumb image and then it's quote thumb large? Is this supposed to be thumb image and thumb large? Because the second one is super jumbo and super jumbo. Like, does that make no difference or am I just a little confused?
Doesn't matter. The only thing we'll be using to call it is super jumbo. The way we call in this particular computer property is on my news headline, I say dot super jumbo. It returns me a multimedia item.
Right, but where is format equal to from large though? Do we have to do that later?
This guy?
Yeah, when is
We're doing it now. The minute, anytime we call that that computer property, it calculates this for us. It's a filter. It's a filter. Okay, let's keep going. Any other questions before we move on? Any other questions before we move on? Okay, let's go to our cell and see what's going on here. In my cell, I'm gonna go to my configure cell, and here, let's get an image. All that hard work. Let's get an image. So I have a headline. That's good. On my headline, I could say if let thumb image, that's what I'm interested in. Headline, what do we care about here? We just wrote a computed property. How do we access that thumb image? How do we access the computed property we just wrote? How do I access that thumb image multimedia item? That thumb image, right? Okay? This is what we care about. So here we have our thumb image. Great. Our thumb image, we should probably just call this thumb image, maybe multimedia. Multimedia thumb image. Multimedia thumb image. That's better. The computed property we just wrote, guys, the computed property we just wrote is to do all that heavy work for us. Get me back a thumb image multimedia item. With that thumb image multimedia item, I will go ahead and use my image client that we wrote. My image client has a method on it. The method is called fetch image. We just wrote fetch image, correct? So I'll go ahead and use my fetch image. I'll pass in a URL here. Oh my God, this is too long of a name. Thumb image dot URL. Completion handler, here it takes a result. Okay, I'll pause here for a station break. Line 33, headline.thumb image returns us a multimedia item. So far, so good? Any questions about that? We wrote a computed property for it. It returns us a multimedia image, which is thumb image. If we option click on thumb image, we see it's a multimedia.
Oh, that's how it's set there. It's a string. Oh gosh.
That's okay. That's why we love code, right? When you get those aha moments. So here we use our image client struct. We access the fetch image. We pass it a URL, and now we have a result. Let's see what the result is. By the way, I'm not even going to go into this topic, but to do memory management. You show that to a senior developer, they'll be like, what is your instructor showing you? So memory management, we need to handle return cycles. Here, we can achieve this by using a capture list. Example, in our capture list, we could do something like unowned self. More on this later.
What are the things like?
More on this later. Retain cycles basically creates memory leaks, right? The more retain cycles you have, the more they stay in memory. Eventually, your app will crash. Everybody? This is a retain cycle, right? One object holds on to a next object, right? The two of them hold on to each other, right? One gets deallocated. It still has access to it. It's still in memory. That creates a retain cycle. Eventually, having more of those happening in your app, the app could eventually crash. Memory error.
Is that related to like all of the?
All of those comments I just put in there.
You know, all the curly braces, like does that let you know that you guys have?
No, what we're about to do right now, we're in a closure, and we're about to capture self. That's about to create a strong reference to self, right? And it's about to create a retain cycle,
Oh, we didn't make them. Okay.
right? So this is part of it here. Okay, so let's go ahead and use a switch statement. Again, more on memory management later. So switch result. More on memory management. ARC. If you guys have time on the weekend, I'll send you out some documents to read about that. But more on that later. So, okay.
Is that
Unowned. Example, unowned, or I don't want to introduce too many topics today. I'll hold off on this one for now. Unowned dot, there you go. All right, so here what we're interested in is the data. So let's say case.success, we have an image. Case.error, case.failure, sorry, we have some error. Believe me, this is way better code to write. Before iOS 5.0, it was not as clean cut as this was, as far as like the result type. Having a result type where you have either something got, either we got our data back, success happened, or we have a failure. That's it. Okay, cool. So either we have an image or we have an error. If we have an error for now, we will just print out some error here. I will use my configure cell and I will say error. Configure cell image error. And for my success, let's go ahead and set up our image view. We have an image view, great, great, great. So let's set up the image view. So here we have headline image view dot image equal to image. Look at that. That lasts 45 minutes, all for number 41. Was it worth it? Okay. Okay, so here we have an error. Reference to property headline image view enclosure requires explicit self. So, remember I said earlier, we use self where we need to use self. Places we need to use self, initializers and closures. Okay? Any place else, like in your view did load, you don't need to use self there. Please don't use self there and submit it to anybody. But now we need to go ahead and we need to use self here. Self dot, because we're in a closure, we need to refer to that actual object using self. And that self here, it creates a retain cycle. Because now my closure captures self. Closures is a reference type. A closure is a reference type. So that particular closure is now referencing self. Right? So it now has a pointer to self. So this is why we need to say unowned self. Actually, let's just write it. Haha. We explain it enough to just write it. So this is a capture list. Now I'm breaking any retain cycles that's possible there. Unowned, the difference between unowned and weak, you don't have a guarantee that the image view is part of the cell. If you say you unown, that means the cell and the image view are tied together. You guarantee that if the cell is around, the image view will be around. Everybody with me? I'm guaranteed that the two of them will exist at once. Weak is saying, I'm not sure if the image view will be around while the cell is around. Everybody with me? That's the big difference. That's a big interview question. We'll talk about it many times. Weak versus unowned. Right? So again, on the weekend, while you are detoxing from food, you could simply Google weak versus unowned. Right? Unowned. Big topic at interviews. Bim, 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 bim. Bim, 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 bim. What else can we do here? This is big. Right? Okay. At this point, we have enough to test our code out. Let's go ahead and run our application. Whoa, we wrote a lot of code before we ran our app. Whoa! Whoa, 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 whoa. What's that? What's happening here? Whoa! A lot of things. Anybody remember what I said about that line? They get a brownie point. Ooh, Tiffany got it. Tiffany got it. Something about a main thread. Yes. For the job. You got it. So, we're on the background thread right now. We're on a different thread that is not the main thread. Everybody with me? Right? I'm on a different thread that's not the main thread. And I'm about to update some UI. Line 46 is updating UI. Everybody with me? This is a UI update. Before iOS 9, we didn't have that beautiful purple error. Or was it iOS 10? I can't remember, losing track. But now we have this purple error. Xcode explicitly tells us, hey, Mr. Jahid, you're about to update some UI on a non-main thread thread, right? You're about to update a UI on a thread that is not the main thread. So stop, you need to fix this. So we need to fix that using dispatch queue. Using dispatch queue that we saw earlier, we need to dispatch that work back to the main thread. We need to tell this UI, Mr. UI, please go to the main thread to update yourself. Okay? Yes?
Is this so that we see it when we segue? Because I don't see it when we segue.
Well, we haven't even set that code up yet. But before we even get to the segue part, we need to fix that code because that's a crash, number one. It actually crashed our app, right? It doesn't crash now, but behavior will become very weird very quickly. The user will scroll, it will become very staggery. A lot of things will happen really quickly. So this is Xcode telling you, Amini, stop now and update this particular code there to be on the main thread. Everybody with me? Everybody with me?
I know it's cool, right?
Yeah. It's better than the red. Okay, so here, let's go ahead and update any UI. Let's put that in bold for Amini especially. Update any UI elements on the main thread. Remember, our image client fetch image, that's happening on a background thread. It's happening asynchronously. So anytime you're coming back from an asynchronous call, come back and update your UI on the main thread. Remember, URLSession is an asynchronous call. It's been done on the background. If I want to update my UI after my image comes back, I need to be doing it on the main thread. How do we get access? The main thread is using concurrency, again, going back to concurrency, what we spoke about earlier. If we have all those tracks happening, the main thread is that main thread for the application. That application's main thread should always be free for UI updates. Okay? So here we'll use the dispatch queue API. We'll use the dispatch queue API. We'll get access to the main thread, and we'll do our update asynchronously. Asynchronously, again, I do not want to block anything from happening. I want to make an async call. I'm using async here. And in that closure, I'm putting my UI updates. In the closure here, that's where I put my UI updates. UI updates go here. So anything it is, whether it be a table view or anything that's UI related, anything that has UI kit in it or UI label, UI, goes into that main queue here. So let's go ahead and update that here and run our app again. And there we have low power.
Oh, that's why, because it's headline image view dot image, which is.
Okay, so at this point, we should have our images. We should be able to scroll. We should have no lag, nothing getting staggered here, right? We should have our images being populated, right? If we segue over, we do not have an image set up yet. We'll get to that last step later, and we'll end the lecture there. Any other questions so far? So for the weekend, you could use that image client struct to work on anything that has an image. Everybody with me? If it's coming from an async call, you have to use it. For our update UI, we'd have to use it too. So let's go ahead and update that, and we'll come back and review all the code we've written so far. So let's go to our detail view to update our large image. So in my UI here, I'm in update UI for my detail controller. Tiffany, you'll be asking questions later. I see you. Head up. Okay, so I'm in update UI, news detail controller. I want to access do I have an image view here? Yes, I do. Okay. Let us update our image. Update image using, what image are we interested in here? Super Jumbo, very good. Update image using Super Jumbo. Multimedia. So here, let's go ahead and do it. So we're gonna say, well, first of all, we need to get access to it. So if let Super Jumbo image, enter, we have our headline, we have Super Jumbo, and here we have our Super Jumbo. We access our image client, we say fetch image, I pass in my Super Jumbo image.url, completion handler takes in a result type, and here we switch on the result type. We say case failure, let error, print error, and ideally you probably want to use like a UI alert controller here. UI use UI alert controller to indicate to the user something went wrong. And next case, we have case success, let image. And here we have our image. It's called headline. We know we have to use self here because we're in a closure. So self headline image view dot image equal to image. And now we know about retain cycles. We could say unowned self. Wow, you guys are rock stars. I'm not going to show the alert controller today. No matter how much you ask me, you're done. All right. At this point, if you wrote that code, you should be able to segue and see an image. Do I get confirmation from anybody? While people are typing. Amini, what happened? Your fingers took a break today?
Oh, yeah.
No, something happened in timing and confirmed, so I have to look back and see.
Okay. Mr. Sering, you got it? Very good. I got a thumbs up. That's all I needed.
My hands are sweaty.
Your hands are sweaty. That's the end of it. That's a good day. Monday, we'll come back and fix the to-dos. We'll come back and we'll update it to have an app error, enum, to capture everything that went wrong. We might even see UI alert controller, right? We devs. We're doing what dev people do. We iterate, we refactor. All right, while Mr. Dan is smiling, I'll run my app to verify. I do get an image. I'll click on this image. Look at that. Nobody have told me about this one. Not even Amini. Amini, remember, we do not update things on the background thread that's UI related. Right? Right? Amini, come on. So here we need to dispatch this. We need to dispatch this guy. Dispatch. Dispatch this. Amini, no turkey for you Thursday. Don't care how much you ask. All right, cool. We'll see. Also, we'll see at some point to do. We'll see UI activity indicator, right? Shows the user an indicator as to the progress of a download, right? That's a better user experience to show them like an activity indicator, something swirling along while your image is getting populated. Everybody with me? So we'll come back to that again. But now we have our image. Look at that, a nice little big image here. We could search for things, Mac.
Once we put the stuff that had our image down.
Oh, I don't want to see that guy.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not political here, but I'm just saying. Okay, so Instagram. We've seen things, right? We've seen photos. We could see photos here.
So if mine is not,
I want to see what's happening in your machine, but for now, please, if you're coming back from a background thread, please put it in the dispatch queue, main. Cool? Was everybody able to get the detailed image happening?
No errors.
No errors? Shania, what is your current state?
I can hit those, but the image still won't pop in. It still shows stuff. Photos stuff.
Okay, I'll come to your computer and see what's going on. Cool. How are we doing, guys? Any questions before we end lecture? Yes?
I do have a question. So even though I see that we can see the complete full title on the regular page, right? But when we click on the title.
Oh, you mean the nav bar here?
Yes, fit in there.
A lot of apps are the same UI we have. You won't see the entire title if it's a very long title. You could do other things to combat that. If you really want to see what the title is, you could create like a label with multi-lines, right? But this is as far as you go. Cool? Great. You guys did excellent.
Thank you. You did excellent.
Thumbs up. We have an image client that we could use over the weekend as we work on our own apps.
Oh, you can change the background color.
So I will stop here. Thank you.